Welcome to the Compliance 911 Show, a no-nonsense podcast discussing hot topics for today's busy compliance professional. It's everything you wanted to know about regulatory compliance, but we're afraid to ask. And now, here are your hosts, Dean Stockford of M&M Consulting and Len Suzio of GeoData Vision.
Dean, just this year we discussed CRA, fair lending, and redlining, appraisal bias 1071, ERM basics, BSA, AI, and other regulatory hot topics. This is an extensive list. In fact, you titled this podcast, Keeping Up with All the New Regulations. And I thought to myself, is this Dean's version of Keeping Up with the Kardashians? So what interesting topic do you bring to the table today, Mr. Kardashian? No.
Yeah. Well, I'd certainly love to have their paycheck for sure.
Yeah.
But, we certainly have, Len, covered a myriad of I'll just summarize it as great topics that I believe are very helpful to our audience. And today, I figured I'd offer a little bit of guidance to compliance officers on keeping up with all of the regulatory changes. And I also have, just something about the chatbots and as an example, and I'll unpack all of that here in just a moment.
Well, I think that's a great idea, Dean. Not only have we seen changes in the regulations, but changes because of interpretation or shift in expectations by regulators. So how many hours is this presentation going to go?
Yeah. Well, I'd like to say a couple, but I don't think anybody would listen for that long. So we're going to try to condense it down in just 6 or 7 minutes, just to give you some food for thought and things to take with you, or takeaways, I should say, from this presentation. Not only initially on how you should monitor, regulatory changes, but also getting into some specifics or an example, as I indicated, with recent guidance that came out about chatbots. But, you are correct about all the new regulations with the new 1071 rule, expected CRA final rules, BSA, beneficial ownership rules, automated valuation method rules, Reg Z, qualified mortgage rules, data rights, card rules, instant payment systems. Oh my goodness, I'm out of breath. But can you see why this could be a difficult task for compliance professionals? And these are, all in addition to the attention that's being afforded to fair lending right now under the DOJ's Redlining initiative, and the application of UDAAP's unfairness standard. Like I said, did I mention AI and chatbots? So there's a lot, man. There's an awful lot.
Well, that's for sure. I think I counted the list that you compiled. It was like at least a dozen or so different changes. And I've certainly been focused on CRA and climate risk. But let's hear what you have to say today. I'm certain our audience is very, very interested.
Yeah, well, now you can see why keeping up with the changes can be a little bit of a challenge, especially for smaller institutions that don't have, let's just say, large or robust type compliance department or systems that assist in these efforts. So today I'd like to walk, a new compliance professional through a recent guidance that was published by the CFPB in June. And that will illustrate steps that should be taken, whether it's a new regulation, whether it's an interpretation, issued regulatory guidance, so on and so forth. What the CFPB doesn't do is release a new law or regulation oftentimes, so the compliance officer is left with asking, what do I do with this guidance, as there's no regulation or anything specific necessarily to point to or anything new. However, there is a lot to do when you see regulatory guidance, again, a shift in postures, a shift in expectations, so on and so forth. So, I think it'll be important for this today.
Well, Dean, I agree. There's much to do, and we just can't move on because of no regulation or change in the law. But how does one first learn of these changes, whether regulatory or guidance in nature?
Yeah, hi, Len. I'd first provide, guidance on techniques that one could use to keep up with the regulatory changes. Then I'll kind of pivot and provide some specific examples on recent guidance, as I just indicated, from the CFPB, to illustrate how I would address in processes. But first, let's start with the regulatory monitoring piece. I think that's probably the most important aspect as of right now with all the regulatory changes. So, I think it kind of a no-brainer. Stay informed. Probably the first step. Changes evolve and they occur daily. I think that somebody needs to, or at least somebody within the institution, typically the compliance officer, is tasked with tracking those changes, those regulatory changes or interpretations. So a regulatory calendar is certainly helpful, and use other resources such as your local associations, your regulatory agencies, perhaps even a subscription service to stay up on those changes. We provide a newsletter and a calendar, and those combined or cumulatively are really the tool that we use in order to stay up and keep people informed on what the regulatory changes are. Monitoring websites is also a very helpful tool to see what could be changing. Attend online or in-person conferences. Obviously, you and I know a lot about that because not only do we attend them from time to time, we also put them on in the form of webinars or online type guidance. It's a means of growing connections. It's a great way to stay up on the regulatory changes or interpretations, and certainly helps expedite your awareness relative to the changes.
And I might add, Dean,
Yeah,
that
please.
this
Yeah,
podcast is a good example of how to keep up with the changes that are going on, which you and I have been talking about for the last going on 2 years now. So,
yeah.
we hope we're a great resource in these podcasts for these issues with compliance and risk officers.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you said that. It kind of just missed my radar a little bit. But yes, the importance of this is, it is significant. And we've received some very valuable feedback from our audience
Hmm.
as to our podcast. And while they may be short in nature, they're extremely informative and pointed on various topics to really assist those compliance officers. So very good. And thank you for sharing. Or reminding me, I should say. But the
Hmm.
other step I was going to say is review internal processes. Once you become aware, of changes or guidance, you should conduct internal reviews or audits to identify any gaps in your existing practices compared to the new guidance or requirements, and of course, update processes and procedures accordingly. Use software if you have the ability to do that. And the financial resources, compliance software might be a productive way to manage regulatory changes. Build a team. I always say somebody's got to be there. You got to have that guy, that professional that not only can help identify what the changes are, but also help implement, interpret, and train accordingly. So, again, make sure you have the bench and make sure you have that person, that captain on the team that can certainly help you. I know these are just a few techniques to monitor and implement change, but again, in a short podcast, they're very helpful for somebody.
That's great advice for our listeners, Dean. Now, I think there was something that was issued recently by the CFPB that you might want to cite as an example.
Yeah, as I was just mentioning, in June of 2023, Len, the CFPB published a spotlight and blogged about financial institutions and their use of artificial intelligence and chatbots. In the blog, the CFPB touches upon the risk involved with using chatbots, and in particular from a UDAAP perspective. So, something that we've talked about on numerous occasions is UDAAP and how they take that broad brush approach to every regulation. We know that the CFPB is discussing existing laws, regulations, and guidance on the newer topic, which is the use of chatbots. And the compliance officer may be asking, how do I respond to this, given there are no regulatory changes? So that's, I think that's probably anybody's first reaction. So, first, I would say gain an understanding of how and where the institution is using chatbots or chatbot like technology. Include in this any project where chatbots or chatbot like technology is being considered. That's a good first step. Secondly, for each of the above items that I spoke of, ensure that all risks are identified and discussed. If there are projects in flight that the compliance professional wasn't aware of, that's an issue right there. Risks need to be identified and discussed at the planning stage of projects, not toward the end. So remind the lines of business leaders that the compliance professional needs to be involved in these types of discussions and certainly implementation. Third, ensure that adequate testing is being performed. Ensure that testing isn't designed just to spot failure and erroneous information being provided, but also to spot endless loops the consumer can exit, or the provision of choices for the consumer to click on that don't reflect the consumer situation, but force them to select something that they don't wish to select. So frustration and stress in the process is viewed negatively by the CFPB or any regulator for that matter. So again, let's remain calm and try to navigate our way through these changes. Next, provide updated training. I mean, I think that just goes hand in hand with everything we do. We need to train people and be very specific, sometimes job specific, depending on what their job may be. But we need to provide updated training on the compliance risks associated with using those chatbots or chatbot-like technology. So, and then lastly, I would say consider updating your complaint intake form to have an identifier for whether the complaint involves the consumer's interaction with a chatbot or a chatbot-like technology. So I think that's imperative to identify it that way. So, these are just a few recommendations, but as I mentioned, it all starts with monitoring for the change or guidance and then creating a process around that to address the implementation in the regulatory advice.
Well, Dean, you certainly packed in a lot of advice, great advice in this podcast, and I'm certain our listeners will benefit from listening to it.
Well, thank you, Len, and I hope our audience found the guidance helpful. This is Dean Stockford from M&M Consulting.
And this is Len Suzio from Geodata Vision saying thank you for listening to today's topic, and please let us know of additional topics you would like to hear in future episodes.
Thanks for listening to the Compliance 911 Show. If you like the podcast, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. While you're at it, please give us a like and review to help others find the show. As always, links are in the show notes, and you can always find us online at compliance911show.com. Follow M&M Consulting and Geodata Vision on LinkedIn for all the latest news and information on compliance hot topics.